Again, I was talking about the two most common chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. There are literally thousands of others, some 4,000, 5,000. It really depends on how the chemist defines PFAS. There are thousands of PFAS chemicals overall. Let's a little bit on the background, sources and uses of PFAS. This should be slide 3. PFAS are or have been found in a wide variety of consumer products, cookware like Teflon, your nonstick cookware, food packaging like pizza boxes, stain and water repellent. It's used as a stain and water repellent in fabrics, carpets, and outerwear. So a lot of your raincoat jackets, carpets, to keep them from catching on fire, couches as well, fire resistant, your boots, keep those water resistant. Those all will have PFAS in them. PFAS can be found at manufacturing and processing facilities, at airports, at military installations that use AFFF, the firefighting foams.
Popcorn?
Yeah, popcorn too, yes. The inside of the bag of your microwave popcorn. So you can add that. This is just a small, I've only talked about a few. So there are quite a few uses for PFAS chemicals. If you need something that doesn't non-stick or fire resistant, then it's probably a pretty good bet that there's some PFAS there. They are ubiquitous. Most are they're all man-made, so it's anthropogenic chemicals. A widespread use since the 50s, but actually use does date back to the 40s. Teflon was created in 1938. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Slide 4. Most people have been exposed to PFAS chemicals. It was detected in 98% of human blood samples in the NHANES study in 2011 and 12. Now, since then, PFAS concentrations have come down, but that's just to show that, again, these PFAS chemicals are now ubiquitous in the environment, and we're exposed to them all at some time. PFAS chemicals can accumulate and stay in the human body for long periods of time. This is referred to as bioaccumulation, or they bioaccumulate. Some bioaccumulate more than others. Generally speaking, and this isn't true for all of them, but generally speaking, the longer the carbon chain, the more bioaccumulative that they are. So the bigger, if you want to just go by bigger, the bigger the PFAS chemical, the more it tends to bioaccumulate. Evidence that that exposure to certain PFAS may lead to adverse health effects and environmental effects. So the agency has noted hepatotoxicity, immunotoxicity, neurotoxicity, developmental toxicity, carcinogenicity, and other effects as well that I haven't listed here. Moving on to slide 5. Now talk a little bit, that's background. Let's talk a little bit about what the agency is committed to do with regards to PFAS. Back in February of 2019, EPA developed its EPA PFAS action plan. This was based on feedback from a number of meetings and comments received by the agency from states, tribes, stakeholders, and the general public. It lists actions that the agency plans to take to address PFAS and public health. Now, with the new administration, President Biden has highlighted the importance of and his commitment to tackling PFAS pollution, protecting public health and the environment. So the agency is committed to taking action to better understand and reduce the potential risks of PFAS, including how to safely dispose of and to clean up PFAS in the environment. The agency's actions moving forward to address PFAS chemicals will be underpinned by science. So I'm going to move on to 6. This is EPA's Council on PFAS. So under the new administration, on April 27th of this year, EPA Administrator Regan created the EPA Council on PFAS. They were given a number of charges, but they were, as one, developed a charge to develop a strategic plan. This will be titled the PFAS 2021-2025 Safeguarding America's Waters, Air, and Land Strategic Plan. It's a multi-year strategy, deliver critical public health protections to the American people. So under the last administration, we had the EPA PFAS action plan, and moving forward, we'll have this 21-25 waters, air, and land multi-year strategy. This strategy is expected to prioritize partnerships and collaboration within EPA and our federal, state, tribal, and local partners. So the agency is committed to that. EPA Council on PFAS was charged to make initial recommendations within 100 days of establishment. Now, if you go back to April 27th and go by 100 days, I'm not sure exactly how they were doing that, calendar days or work days, but we would expect something from the EPA Council on PFAS here shortly. I know they are meeting on a regular basis, but those recommendations haven't come out yet. I've listed a website there at the bottom that you can go to for additional information about and to kind of track the work that's going on with the Council on PFAS. Moving to slide 7, I'll talk a little bit about some of the actions that we've taken with regards to PFAS, and I'll start with some of the toxicity assessments. So this is overall PFAS toxicity assessments, but I'll talk about some of the specific chemicals moving forward here. So in November of 2020, EPA published the final toxicity assessment for perfluorobutane sulfonic acid and its related compounds. This is known as Gen X. Gen X are the this is kind of a generalization, so don't hold me completely to specifics, but Gen X is kind of the next line for PFOA. So PFOA was removed from the market, and Gen X has kind of filled that spot to some degree. EPA is developing human health toxicity assessments for 5 additional PFAS, and they're listed there under the IRIS program. Also, there is a draft. This actually just came out within the last a week or so. There's a draft perfluorobutanic acid, PFBA risk assessment that was released for a 60-day public comment period. So you can get further information on that link at the bottom on that, but the public comment period is currently open. Moving on to the next slide, slide 8. This is on PFBS. Now the PFBS was actually released earlier, but it was re-released on April 8th of this year, so not that long ago. PFBS is perfluorobutane sulfonic acid. This revised assessment fixed some errors in the version that was issued earlier this year. It was developed by our EPA scientists, and it upholds the highest values of scientific integrity. And we'll leave that at that. Stakeholders can use assessment along with specific exposure and other relevant information to determine if and when it's necessary to take action to address potential health risks associated with exposure to PFBS. And again, a link there at the bottom. So moving to slide 9, we'll talk a little bit about highlighted actions with regards to drinking water. As many of you may know or probably know, there's a lifetime health advisory that was issued back in May of 2016 for PFOA and PFOS for total, and that is 70 parts per trillion. Now, in February of this year, 2021, EPA reissued the final determinations to regulate PFOA and PFOS in drinking water. And I've put a link in there for that so you can get some additional information about it. But based on that final determination, EPA must propose a regulation to be published for public comment by March of 2023. And then a final rule must be published 18 months after that. Moving on to the UCMR, that's the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. EPA under UCMR 3, that was an earlier monitoring process. We did monitor PFAS, and we did find PFAS in drinking water. We only looked, I believe, at 6 PFAS at the time. Now we're going to require monitoring on 29 different PFAS chemicals using methods 533 and 531.7. So those methods have been, in the last year to 2 years, have been updated. We can now test for 29 PFAS chemicals using those methods. Sampling will occur 2023 to 2025. The public comment period just closed earlier this year, and so they're reviewing those public comments. One of the big differences I think that you would see here, that those of you who are familiar with UCMR monitoring, in the past, UCMR has required all systems serving 10,000 people or more to have representative sample from the system. Now they're changing that to 3,300 people or more for a representative sample of systems. And you also have to have representative sample of systems that serve fewer than 3,300 to also perform monitoring. Now in the past, that's been around 800, I believe. So I would expect it'll be somewhere around that. I'm not exactly sure what that'll be for the smaller systems. Moving on to slide 10. On July 30th of this year, 2021, EPA published final versions of SW 846 methods, method 3512 and 8327 for 24 PFAS. This is in surface water, groundwater, and wastewater. And that's, that's in relation to the 136 methods, 533 and 537.1 that are specifically for drinking water. So these are for surface water, groundwater, and wastewater. Now these methods were multi-lab validated in surface water and groundwater and wastewater. The method 3512 is an aqueous sample preparation method, and 8327 is a liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry PFAS determination method. So that's the determination method. And I've listed some links there for you all to get additional information on that. Now that's not, part 136, but what the agency is doing, as I understand right now, is looking at ways to make sure that they come out with guidance on how to use these under 136 and meet the requirements of 136. So look for more information about that in the near future. But again, these were just issued here in the last month, so the agency is working to adopt those for 136. All right, so I'm moving on to slide 11, wastewater. EPA also re-signed an action to solicit data on the presence and treatment of PFAS in wastewater discharges from PFAS formulators and manufacturers. Now, under the Clean Water Act, EPA is evaluating if wastewater discharges from industrial facilities of PFAS warrant regulation through national effluent limitations. So they are looking at whether or not we're going to need national effluent limitation guidelines. In November of 2020, EPA released the interim strategy to provide guidance on how to address PFAS discharges in EPA issued NPDES permits. And so there's some information there. It includes permit requirements for phased-in monitoring and best management practices when PFAS is expected to be present in a point source wastewater discharge. Also permit requirements for phased-in monitoring and stormwater pollutant control when PFAS are expected to be present in stormwater discharges. So moving on to slide 12. Surface water protection. EPA plans to develop National Clean Water Act human health and aquatic life water quality criteria for PFAS. Now this says as data supports, and those of you who are familiar with human health and aquatic life criteria, The database that's needed is quite extensive, so I'm sure right now that they are working to fill gaps in the database necessary to calculate those criteria. Biosolids, EPA will develop risk assessments for PFOA and PFAS to understand potential health impacts from biosolids. Moving on to toxics, this is slide 13. All right, so toxics. The 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, or that's NDAA, the 2020 NDAA, added quite a few PFAS to the list of chemicals covered by the Toxics Release Inventory. And they also provided a framework to add additional PFAS in the future on an annual basis. So I think they recently added 3 more. On July 1st, 2021, the reporting forms for 172 PFAS chemicals for the reporting year 2020 were due. So that was just a couple months ago. The end of the month, July, the end of last month, EPA published preliminary TRI data that included first ever reporting for PFAS. EPA received a total of 89 TRI reporting forms for 44 discrete PFAS chemicals filed by 38 individual facilities. The preliminary data, again, this is preliminary, so they're going to come out with another report that will be the report on TRI and not preliminary data, but the preliminary data indicate the facilities managed over 700,000 pounds of production-related waste of PFAS just during 2020. In January of 2021, the EPA issued final guidance documents outlining the which imported articles are covered by the agency's July 20 significant new use rule. Now, in that July 20 SNUR, EPA published information to ensure that new uses of certain persistent long-chain PFAS chemicals in surface coatings cannot be manufactured in the United States or imported in the United States without notification and review under TSCA. So moving on to slide 14. All right. On cleanup, in December of 2019, this is a while back now, EPA issued interim recommendations for addressing groundwater contaminated with PFOA and PFAS for federal cleanup programs. CERCLA, that would be Superfund, and for RCRA. This should be helpful to states and tribes. And this guidance recommended a screening level of 40 parts per trillion to determine if PFOA and/or PFAS is present at a site at a level that may warrant further attention. Now, in January of this year, January 14th, EPA signed an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, that was done right at the very end of the last administration. This was for consideration of additional authorities for addressing PFAS, including the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance. So the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance would be a very important thing. Now, this advance notice of proposed rulemaking was not published. It was pulled back when the new administration came in. It's currently under review, and we will see how they decide to move forward with this notice. But I expect that we will see something moving forward here with regard to the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance. I just don't know for sure how that will be published or when yet. So designating PFOA and PFAS as CERCLA or Superfund hazardous substances would provide additional authority to address PFOA and PFAS under CERCLA, including the ability to require parties to carry out and/or pay for response actions and for EPA to recover costs associated with those cleanups. So we'll move on now to slide 15. Further on cleanup, in December of last year, EPA released new interim guidance on the destruction and disposal of PFAS and materials containing PFAS for public input. The public comment period ended in February of this year, and those comments are under review. Now, this particular document was required by that same 2020 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. During the comment period, EPA received over 5,000 comments on the interim guidance, and currently the agency is reviewing those and preparing approaches to address the public input. The agency continues to assess the viability of thermal and non-thermal destruction technologies. And I know that ORD is working on that as we speak. But under that NDAA, it also says that the interim guidance on the destruction and disposal of PFAS will be updated in 2023. So I would expect that those comments and concerns or other information provided in those comments will be included in that updated guidance in 2023. Moving on to slide 16. Now we'll talk a little bit about what ORD is doing on the research side. ORD is developing additional toxicity assessments where data are available. ORD is applying high throughput toxicology testing to study the toxicity of the larger universe and to fill the data gaps. And there are a lot of data gaps. We're talking about, again, PFAS are thousands of chemicals. And in order to get an idea of which groups or subclasses within the class of PFAS are more or less toxic, that's where they're using the high throughput toxicology testing. And it does give the agencies some general information about groups of chemicals as opposed to individual testing. Validating, ORD is validating analytical methods. Now we talked about the 846 that's just come out, but they're looking at methods in other areas as well. Soils, sediments, biosolids, developing new methods for ambient air and emissions. And they're also improving laboratory methods to discover unknown PFAS. So perhaps break down products or byproducts in production or manufacturing. So additional information on method development, I've got a link there for you if you'd like to get additional information on that. Moving on to slide 17, further on research. This is a little bit about funding. ORD is funding research to better understand potential impacts of PFAS on water quality in rural and agricultural areas. They're also evaluating the effectiveness of technologies and evaluating methods for managing end of life. So that's the disposal of PFAS contaminated materials. They're also looking at developing databases and models to characterize sources and understanding how PFAS moves through the environment and to impact people, and also how it impacts ecosystems. ORD is working to develop tools and technologies for remediating impacted areas as well. And we'll move on to 18. Now, a little bit about the research that EPA is working on with our partners in academia and other areas. EPA has the Science to Achieve Results grant program, or that's also known as the STAR program. I've listed here a number of different awards that EPA has made under the STAR program. In May 2019, they award about approximately 3.9 million through 2 grants for research that would improve the understanding of human ecological exposure to PFAS. So that focused on exposure to PFAS in the environment. In September 2019, we awarded nearly 6 million to fund research by 8 organizations to expand understanding of the environmental risks posed by PFAS in waste streams and to identify practical approaches to manage the potential impacts as PFAS enters the environment. And here more recently, in August of 2020, we awarded 4.8 million in funding for research, helping to identify potential impacts of PFAS to farms, ranches, and rural communities. So if you want to follow the research that they're doing in these PFAS grants, I've put a link down there that you can go to get more information as they proceed forward with their research. All right, moving to 19. On collaboration, EPA is working with many different state and federal partners. The Environmental Council on States, ECOS. EPA is working with ECOS to ensure state priorities are addressed with regards to PFAS. In fact, I think just this week, ORD's immediate office held one of their bi-monthly PFAS calls with ECOS. So the agency is working on that. That's the immediate office of ORD. USDA and FDA, we're working with them to examine the impacts of PFAS on agricultural, rural communities, and on food supplies. The National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, we were working with them to assess PFAS toxicity, and we're certainly working with DOD on a number of their facilities. We're working on analytical methods and approaches for PFAS cleanup. And as you know, there are a number of DOD facilities where they have found impacts from the releases of AFFF or other uses of PFAS over the years. So moving on to slide 20. In summary, EPA is committed to listening to the public. We do want to work collaboratively with states, tribes, and local communities, water systems. We're looking to be flexible and programmatic in our approaches with regards, not just PFAS, but I would say in general, the agency really does try and be flexible about their approaches. We're looking to build strong foundation of science, and I think the PFBS is an example of that, the recent re-release of that. And again, we are also looking to harmonize environmental authorities, really work with our partners, that our partners and working with them in a good partnership. And that's the presentation today. I've listed my contact information there. Greg Lissy is our RCRA expert, so he deals much more closely with the DOD facilities. So if you've got any questions about that, you're welcome to get in touch with Greg. For any other issues with regards to PFAS in the region, please feel free to give me a call or to contact me by email. I'll be glad to get you any information that I can. And with that, Elena, I will open it up for comments.
Dania Grunman has a question. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, in reviewing the UCMR 5 and the use of method 533, the method indicates that inorganic salts may provide a matrix interference. Has EPA considered that, and in consideration that many Texas waters have inorganic salts that exceed the minimum criteria?
Yes, that's a very good question. So that detailed question I will have to check with our methods folks in ORD, or perhaps the folks in OW, in our Office of Water, might have further information on that. Elena, if you'll make note of that question, I'll follow up on that and see if I can get information on what's going on with regards to the inorganic salts in 533.
Okay, I can do that, no problem. Any studies on PFAS in fish tissue?
Yes, I have heard that there are some studies on fish tissue out there. I don't have any numbers here in front of me on that, but I'll certainly look that up, and I will get some information on that as well. So mark that down, and I'll follow up and see what we can find on fish tissue.
Ma'am, I have a very less technical question than the previous questions. So for us landfill folks, is it safe to say that in the not so distant future, we will expect that some of these constituents will be included in our groundwater testing requirements and our stormwater testing requirements? And do you have a time frame on when we should, start keeping a closer eye on those requirements?
Well, since the 846 is out now, with methods for 24 PFAS in groundwater, surface water, and wastewater, that was one of the holdups. So now that that's there, I know that the agency is working to try some of the requirements sampling prep and other requirements of 846 don't match evenly or precisely with what's in Part 136 for water and for groundwater requirements. So they're working on that right now. They're working to come out with some guidance on how to make sure that you meet the requirements of 136 and use SW846, those two methods, the prep and determination methods that are out now. So I think you'll see more after that. As far as a time frame, I'd be guessing. I don't think it's going to be too long before they come out with information. When I say too long, I would say maybe a few months for some guidance for Part 136, and then something would come out after that with regards to then, what kind of requirements or monitoring would be required of facilities. So we'll see how that goes. But again, you're welcome to follow up with me and in the future, and I'll be glad to hook you up with the right folks and get you the information that you need.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I am seeing a question in the chat. What are your thoughts on breaking down PFAS through anaerobic digestion and co-digestion with food waste?
Wow, I have not looked at studies on that. I have not seen where those chemicals break down there. I would have to check with ORD and see if they've got any information on that. Do they have any studies on that? Is that something that they have? The person with the question, gentleman or gentlewoman with the question, do they have any information on that they could provide, or are they just looking to see what the agency is doing?
Matthew Sheldon, did you want to unmute and respond? He might be just looking at what the agencies
Yeah,
do.
looking to see kind of what's out there, what you've looked into in this matter. When we're thinking about using food waste and co-digesting with bioplastics or other things, eliminating PFAS from that. What type of studies have you seen?
Oh, how to eliminate PFAS on that?
What kind of things have you seen in that area, or just your general thoughts on the topic?
That's a good question, and I actually have not looked into that. So, but I'll see if I can find what's going on for you. I certainly will do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from Ann Rogers. Are there approved field methods for ambient surface water sampling?
Approved methods for surface water sampling. I think that's going to go back again to the 846. So that was for surface water. Those two methods that I had mentioned, and that just recently came out. But because that's SW, it's under the RCRA has waste. If you're going to monitor for surface water under the Clean Water Act, it has to be done under Part 136. So because there are some differences between the requirements of 136 and SW 846, the agency has to kind of link the two, make sure that all bases are covered, so to speak. And they are working on that. So look for that, I would say, in the next several months, because I know they are working on that. Does that help you?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Danya, did you want to go ahead and ask your question yourself?
Well, with the recent regulatory determination and the 70 PPT health advisory level, do you expect individual PFAS standards or a total, in recognition that some target fish and some target drinking water?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. I think part of that's going to There's a lot that's going to go into that. Now, are you talking about the determination for whether or not we're going to have an MCL that
Yes.
that has to come out? But yes. All right. So so much goes into the development of an MCL. It's not just the toxicity; it's cost. There's a cost basis in that involved as well. So that work has yet been done, and until that, I say it's not been done. They are working on it right now. It's not something I do day to day. It's something that they're doing at EPA labs and up in OW in Office of Water in DC. So those folks are working on those requirements right now to determine what's the best path forward. And until all that work's done, it would be anybody's guess whether it's going to be an MCL or we're not going to have an MCL, or how that's going to be set up, whether it's by specific chemicals for PFOA and PFOS or PFAS in general. The determination was for PFOA and PFOS. So I would expect that it addresses just those two right now. Whether it addresses those combined as the health advisory does with 70 parts for PFOA and or PFOS together, I'm not sure. We'll just have to see. It'll certainly be fun keeping track of it.
Well, I think Minnesota came up with two, and they have a fish tissue target and also a surface water target. And so it's just getting complicated.
Yes, a number of states are developing their own MCLs, their own health advisories, and it is getting very complicated. I would agree with you. So I think it'll be helpful when the agency gets something out.
Okay, and another question here. It's from Gail Copening. What about other countries? Is the U.S. ahead of or behind others?
Well, Gail, you're putting me on the spot with that question. How about we say EPA is doing their best, and we're making good progress, and I'd be a little uncomfortable trying to rank us with other countries. Is that okay, Gail?
And I'm not seeing, and she says yes. She typed in yes. Are there any other questions for Dr. Morton? I'm not seeing any, but I don't want to have missed anything.
If I can be heard, what about the Rio Grande in the valley?
The Rio Grande. I'm not sure I understand specifically what your question is about the Rio Grande. Are we monitoring it?
Correct. Texas, Mexico.
Well, that would be the state. That would be the state doing monitoring. So you would have to check with the TCEQ on that.
I don't see any more questions, Dr. Morton. So I guess we will go ahead and wrap up. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and many thanks to Dr. Michael Morton for taking the time to share this information with us today. And this webinar is now over.